Hey, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural edition of the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club. How are you? For those of you who don't know what's happening right now and haven't been paying attention, I am launching, and this is the very beginning of it, a sort of companion podcast to go along with the regular short fiction horror podcast entries of the Westside Fairytales. So this is basically just a way for me to come down and kind of get a little bit more closer to you guys, man to man, fan to fan, that sort of thing. So you can kind of hear me talk normal. I've always been the kind of guy who worries that people, won't really get me, kind of thing. And ever since I started the Westside Fairytales, and especially since I started picking up fans, I have a semi-frequent fear of people thinking that I am the same kind of person as the narration that I do at the beginning, which feels a little fakey to me, just because it is fake. It's me reading pre-made notes so that I don't stutter and ramble my way through things. So when I started the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club podcast on the Patreon originally, and so anybody who's from the Patreon listening, hello, you guys know what to expect already. But it was very well received there, and people like to hear a little bit more about kind of me and my relationship with literature, and I thought it was something I could share with you guys. And if you're not interested, if you don't care to hear this stuff, don't worry, you're not going to offend me. You don't have to listen. The regular Westside Fairytales episodes are going to come out the same way they always do on the first Friday of the month, and this is just an extra thing that's coming out every other weekend. And it's basically me talking about the recommendations from the previous episode. So in the case of today's Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club, I'm going to be talking about Night in the Woods and Preacher. I like to kind of go off topic and divulge and talk about random stuff too. Excuse me, sorry. Before we hop into things, I would like to add that you guys can join the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club. It's not a very exclusive club. All you got to do is be a human being and like literature, and then go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club. You can just search for it in the bar. I think we're at like 200 members and growing now, which is pretty cool. It's a small thing. And it's not a huge like organization or anything. I know a lot of my friends who are in the podcasting game have groups, and they have like 10 people the day they start. They have 75 people by the next day, and then they have like 4,000 people in their groups like by the next weekend. And then it kind of, generally, they kind of, because they're all true crime people, the groups devolve into 4 kinds of posts. Basically, there's the have you seen this story post, and you have seen that story because it's a post about true crime in a true crime group. There's the have you seen this story, and you haven't seen that story because nobody has, because it's like really not interesting. And then there's people sharing other people getting punished for crimes, and that usually just leads into a lot of we should kill people that kill other people conversations, and then the last is just requests for people to cover certain things, and that's pretty much it. There's some good stuff that happens in those groups, but quite generally, almost across the board, big or small, every true crime group kind of looks the same. So when I started the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club, I wanted it to be different. You don't do that stuff. It's not a true crime thing. It's really just about scary shit and fucking reading. And I like it. There's a lot of good stuff. You can come in there and talk about books that you've been reading. You can talk about horror movies. you've seen, video games you played, anything that really just interests you in either of those two topics. And as long as you keep it on topic, you're good. People just go there and talk to each other about stuff, which is great because I don't have to try to keep things going all the time. Fucking awesome. And it's also the location of the main conversations around the Westside Fairytales episodes themselves. Don't worry if you hop over to the group. It's not just me self-promoting the entire time, although I do my fair bit of self-promotion there because it is my group and I have that right. But let's just hop into it. So this month's random horror recommendation was Night in the Woods, which is a January 10th, 2017 release by developer Infinite Fall. It's an indie dev that all of the music and design is done by a guy named Alec Holowka. I can't say his name right. Alec, if you're listening, I apologize. I'm dumb. And that's pretty much all I have to say about it. And the writing was done by Bethany Hockenberry and Scott Benson. And man, I really just love Night in the Woods. It's one of those. It's an indie title in every aspect. I haven't played a game really like it ever before. I've played games that are in that vein. Obviously, it's sort of just as an interface way of explaining it. It's a side-scrolling sort of adventure game, but not like adventure where it's like Mega Man where you're running around shooting people. There's actually very little combat at all, and most of it's really played for laughs. There's a knife fighting mini game that is extraordinarily dumb and wonderful, and I won. So suck it, Greg. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, but you probably don't, because I am here to recommend the thing to you. So, in that vein, it's basically you just kind of wander around the town of Possum Springs, and it's a dying coal town up in the mountains, which really just speaks to me. That's like my favorite place to set stuff. Obviously, if you've been following the podcast for a long period of time, a lot of my stories start or end in coal country in West Virginia in the hills and stuff. I actually, if none of you guys are familiar with me expounding upon it in the Patreon, I fell in love with West Virginia about 4 years ago now. It's where I met my fiance, and I did not think I would enjoy West Virginia because it is much maligned, and for good reasons in the press, and for bad reasons as well. And so you kind of get this impression that this place is a beat up, hillbillies and violence and racism and drugs and blah, 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 blah. And there's a little bit of all of those things, but in my opinion, not that much more than the rest of America. You know what I mean? Obviously, maybe the numbers might not really, really go for that, but I feel like it's just a place where most of the modern conveniences that we're all super used to haven't really taken hold. And I'm not just talking about like they don't have internet and electricity. There's internet and electricity there by the plenty, but you might have to drive like 3 towns to get to a Target, or you might be the town with the Walmart, and then everyone comes and hangs out in your parking lot. And, those sort of things. There's not a plethora of jobs, and the jobs that are available are very specific, so it's one of those things I can consider a modern convenience, that you can see an occupation like on the internet or something, or you can read about it in a book or whatever, and then want to do that thing, and then you really won't have to leave home necessarily for most of those occupations in order to do them, which is not the case in West Virginia. I mean, they need nurses, they need doctors, electricians, coal miners, teachers of that sort, but there's a lot of really, really specific type jobs that you just won't find a necessity for in certain towns. Or, you could live in that town, but you have to drive 1,000,000 miles to do whatever it is that you do for work. I don't have really specific examples, but trust me, it is the case. You know what I mean? But on that note, that is where Night in the Woods takes place. And it's a very wonderful, dark game. It's without getting too much into the plot because I don't want to really spoil it. But the main character, whose name is May, she is a anthropomorphic cat. If you don't know what that word means, she's a cat that looks like a person. She's got arms and legs. And everybody else that's in the town, in the world, one would assume, is some sort of animal. Most of them are fairly common domestic type, animals native to America. So it's nothing like too extraordinary. And she has giant nightmare eyes. But May starts off the story by returning to town, actually in the middle of the night. She sneaks back home after sort of unofficially dropping out of college in order to kind of come to grips with and address certain issues that she's been facing. Like most of which, the biggest two are kind of her disassociation with her own self as she grows up and she doesn't really understand who she's becoming as an adult. And also, she is a mentally ill person, not in a crushing, debilitatingly mentally ill, but she has some mental sicknesses, which you can't really go into without spoiling stuff. But it's problems that she has to address, and that's pretty common. I have a few mental things myself. I'm pretty sure most of you listening do, and her return is kind of compounded by the fact that her parents have their own stories going on. Her parents are poor coal town people, and they made a lot of sacrifices to put her in college, and she's dropping out because it's not making her happy. Her friends are starting to move on. Even her kind of scumbag best friend Greg is, he's getting ready to grow up and move out with his boyfriend and maybe leave town, kind of thing. And it's just a great story on that level alone. It's fun. And you find stuff out by traveling around and you talk to other characters. And you almost never get anything explained to you in the entire game, even the little tidbits that I let out. You have to find. You really have to dig them up. And if you're sort of a truffle pig for good plot and backstory and lore, the story is just amazing. And it's a blast because you can talk to random people in their little underground ferry that they have in the town. And you can learn all kinds of stuff about people's pasts and various nonsense. And there's places you can get to on the roofs. And the whole place is honeycombed with interesting little tidbits. And you get rewards and stuff for finding out little secrets. But that isn't the scary part of it. The horror aspect of it revolves around at least one dark hooded figure that is seen lurking in the background, even from the earliest parts of the game. And you start to find out that people have gone missing in this town for years before. And without getting too into it, it's just a blast finding out that story. And you can actually, I think it's possible to beat the game. Beat the game just really means completing the story without actually finding out what's happening in the town. You can just be a bad detective and a lazy person. I'm pretty sure you can just sleep every day and not talk to anyone, and that's the way to finish it. There are multiple endings depending on people who you talk to, depending on how in-depth you get, and the sort of side activities and stuff that you do. But I mean, the game is really just an incredible approach to a sort of story you've kind of heard before. The Twin Peaks town with secrets. And the freaks and geeks, weirdo losers and where are they now type thing. And but when you put those together, it's really just a blast of a story to get through. And I actually played it with my fiance when it came out. I saw it and I really just assumed, apropos of nothing, because I didn't know anything about the developer. I just based on the art style. And some of the things people were saying in the game in the preview alone, I was just like, this looks like it could be a blast. And I was really well rewarded for taking the time to check that out. The writers, again, that's Bethany Hockenberry and Scott Benson. Dude, they knocked it out of the ballpark. The main plot is very engrossing, and it's actually a blast to find out what's going on if you take the time to really dig into the town and and figure out like the sort of secrets and the back area stuff, to the point where it's actually, in my opinion, worth playing through the game a second time after you've done it, just to see the other possible endings and just to see if you notice things again on the second playthrough that you didn't notice the first time. Because, well, just everybody that you can see in the town, even if you can't talk to them, has a point to being there, basically. But yeah, man, if you like a fun little diversion of a game, I think playing through it, maybe it was like 4 to 7 hours over the course of, like maybe twice as many days. I think it took us like 2 weeks to play it. And we just play like half an hour here and half an hour there, an hour there. And then we beat it and we wanted to play through it again. And it's a really casual game. If you don't know anything about video games, and you don't even have a console, you can still play it. You can download it on your computer if you have a computer, through Steam, and just play it that way. And I would 100% recommend this to anybody that's sort of looking for that sort of thing. Again, the game is Night in the Woods, from developer Infinite Fall, and I will leave a link in the show notes for you guys to go ahead and check it out and find it. The literature recommendation for this month is the entirety of the run of the comic book Preacher by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, which ran from 1995 through the year 2000. This comic book is like literally one of my favorite comics of all time. I think I've read through the entirety of it 3 times now, which, it's been almost 20 years since the damn thing came out. Finished running, really. It's been more than 20 years since it came out. And it still works for me. The plot is basically, and if you've seen the AMC series Preacher, I think it's on AMC or FX, one of the slightly edgy, but not that edgy cable networks that are in when I was growing up there in like the mid 40s, mid 50s. That's where all the edgy shit is. That's MTV, VH1, and then it ends with Comedy Central and Sci-Fi on 50 and 52. Anybody that's really young, once upon a time to watch shit, you had to put numbers into a remote control, and that would send you to a certain place. Anybody that's really, really young, once upon a time, you had to twist a gigantic dial and it would I shouldn't be old enough to remember that. But my grandma never got rid of that TV. So you actually, the knobs always went to the same place, and they didn't have the numbers on it. So the numbers would change no matter where you lived. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a knob TV only had, there's literally only 12 tuning stations you could go to, and it would cut into them. And so you had to I don't know if you had to go inside the thing, but basically you had to preset all these knob selections and then write in what number it was. So star 64 when I was growing up was a WPN. It was one of the most common ones, channel 9. It was ABC, I think, American Broadcasting Corporation. And you would have to click it over to that. And if there was anything between channel 9 and channel 64 that you wanted to watch and you didn't have it on there, 48 would be PBS. You just didn't get it. So if you wanted to watch one of the other stations, you have to go into the TV, the room with the real TV, which is kind of cool. As a babysitting TV, it was actually clutch as fuck because you literally could not listen or watch anything that wasn't pre-programmed in the TV. You had the 6 stations to choose from. So it was NBC, ABC, CBS, WPN, PBS, and I don't know, one other thing, UPN maybe. Whichever one had the dancing frog. I'm not even kidding. I think it was Warner Brothers might have had their own one station. I digress. This series started running when I would have been getting babysat. At the very end of it, 95, I would have been 8 years old. But it ran 95 to 2000 as the series Preacher. Sorry for the diversion. People that are used to this from the Patreon know the diversions are coming. if you're new here, you might not have expected all of these rants and torrents, but they come, and they go. Anyway, Preacher started running in '95 and ran through 2000, which is kind of a sort of almost fantastic time in American history now. If you don't know too much about America, the late '90s were the product of literally an entire century of just America kind of like almost winning and getting better and getting better. And then we finally beat the Russians. And that was the thing. '89, you beat the Russians. There was some bullshit in the Middle East, and no one even knew what the fuck the Middle East really was with Saddam Hussein. And that was like the Kuwait War. And then everything after that, man, it was the '90s were like a party. A weird, shitty party that I was too young to really enjoy. You had O.J. Simpson was the first major trial, I think, at least in my life, but as far as I remember, the first major trial that was basically the only thing anybody ever talked about for like 7 or 8 months in like 96 or 97, whenever the fuck it happened. And like there was the Bronco police chase after they were hunting him. People with cameras drove after Princess Diana until she died in a car crash. Princess Diana was a thing. If you thought the whole royal family deals like nowadays with the royal weddings and all that nonsense, that shit is nothing compared to the insanity of post Princess Diana's death, which I think might be mentioned in these books, but yeah, it was the 1990s, which was America was literally on top of the world. And like kind of in an unquestionable way. We had tons of money. The economy was in a boom. Clinton was fucking president, for better or for worse. He was in trouble in the White House for having sex with Monica Lewinsky. People mistreated her. This is how back-asswards America was compared to like nowadays. We have like Me Too and stuff where people are almost like, maybe we should calm down, believing every single accusation, to back in the 90s when like some poor intern got basically, conned into having sex with the president of the United States, because how the fuck do you say no to Bill Clinton when he's sitting behind the Oval Office? And then people like basically excoriated her until she could not show her face in public anymore because she was somehow the bad guy. A single woman working in the White House, as opposed to the married sitting president of the United States, who basically soiled the sanctity of the office. And yeah, man, that was the 90s, dude. And this kind of took place in the 90s, and in a way, Preacher is a great reflection on America in general, which is weird because Garth Ennis, who is the writer, as far as I know, is not American. I'm pretty sure he's British as shit. I'd actually almost guarantee it because he worked on Hellblazer. But man, no, it really hits some stuff that like you kind of forget. And it's a place you can't go back to as we get older, where like America had time to sort of sit and reminisce about its like glory days while still living them. And it is really just beyond the pale of bizarre how weird the 90s were, to the point where like no one thought like 2001 could ever have happened. You know what I mean? 9/11 and the 2000s eras were just a complete like 180 from the 90s. Like we had crazy, crashes and stuff. So anyway, Preacher takes place during this sort of time. I'm pretty sure. I know it was written during then. But the cool thing about Preacher is it does feel sort of ageless. The story revolves around a man named Jesse Custer. And without getting into spoilers too deeply, the very first scene, functionally speaking, in the book is him being inhabited by the voice of God, which gives him the power to basically make people do stuff when he says it, and his eyes turn red. And then when he gets hit with it, it blows up his church and like basically kills his entire congregation. And before he, started that. He was basically, very simple drunk preacher type, talking shit to his people, bringing down the law on them. But after that, he kind of goes on a mission. He reunites almost immediately with both his former girlfriend, whose name is Tulip O'Hare, and their traveling companion, a Irish vampire named Cassidy. And the best thing about this book is it is really just a slice of Americana. I mean, there's a very, very good reason that I chose it to be a part of the Toda Americana run as a selection, because it's books like this that really kind of put that understanding of that kind of story in me, even though it's not even an American writing it. But these three people, their travels across America kind of take them up against all of the good and the bad in this country. And I mean, you kind of go in on racism, and not just racism, but kind of like the historical spirit of racism, and not just how like bad it is, but really how fucking dumb it is, and how like, the things that are espoused by racists. It's one of my favorite jokes in the whole book, the omnibus, I guess you would say, is he runs across a crew of Klansmen at some point. It's actually while he's being the sheriff of a small town, but I digress. Jesse Custer does. And he's like, why is it that every time you run across a crew of you white supremacists, you are never the shining example of the race you claim to be a part of? And then he looks at one guy, and the dude's like literally has no chin. He goes, where in the fuck is your chin at? Like, how are you guys supposed to be better than everybody, and you're not even the best of like whatever the fuck it is you were part of? Which I really appreciate, because I mean, it's a better way of addressing it, at least in the 90s, than some ways were. Because you can always go down to like it's super sad and it's very depressing kind of thing. It's something that people have a bad habit of doing, especially nowadays, where you're trying to make political statements and you're just making political statements in fiction. It's very ham-handed and dull and blunt and obvious. Like, you shouldn't be doing this thing, and everyone's like, we know. Okay, move on. And they did a very good job in a lot of things. Drug abuse, greed, American exceptionalism, military overspending, and they're always kind of just poking fun at it in a way that's just slightly shy of absurd. And Steve Dillon's artwork really helps all this. It really sells a lot of Ennis's writing. Because if you don't know anything about Steve Dillon is kind of much maligned in the comics book industry nowadays. I think it was a degenerative brain condition, but his health began failing, as far as I know, at the beginning, or like toward the middle of Preacher. At the very beginning of Preacher, he has very dynamic face work. And actually, a little bit of history lesson, him and Ennis actually started working on Hellblazer, which is another incredible comic book run. That's John Constantine. If anybody knows about those, it became an American movie called Constantine, starring John Wick himself, Keanu Reeves. honestly, almost as like, literally, he looks like John Wick in that movie, just like 10 years younger, and he doesn't have a dog. He's just fighting the devil instead. But I mean, black suit, black tie, long black hair, as far as I remember, but I digress. The reason that's wrong is because in the books, Constantine has very white hair, and he's supposed to look like Sting. Which Keanu Reeves, God bless his heart, doesn't. And he's like a smooth talking, kind of like wisecracking asshole, and a con man, like a notorious con man, but he's not. But this isn't. Anyway, that's where Steve Dillon and Garth Ennis met toward the ass end, from what I understand, of Garth Ennis's work on Hellblazer. Dillon took over as the artist. If you don't know that much about comic books, you switch out writers and artists fairly constantly, especially for long-running titles. I think when he took over Hellblazer, it had already been going. Garth Ennis had. I think it had already been going for a while. Or he might have started it. I can't remember. But all of that aside, the run of Hellblazer was about 25 years or so. It only ended a few years back. And unlike American comics, a lot of British comics have extended runs that are uninterrupted, where American comics got into a very common habit of just rebooting every 5 months to like 3 or 4 years and then starting another run, even though it's continuously, Detective Comics 103 or Detective Comics 5. The British versions don't interrupt their runs. I mean, it might not be the case now, but it was the case when these started. So you have books like Judge Dredd that's been going on for forever, and Hellblazer, where actually people, you saw the characters age. Like literally 1985 was 1985 to John Constantine, and 2005 was 2005 for John Constantine, and he got fucking old. But it's a kind of a cool thing. But anyway, you switch out artists and stuff because nobody can write something for 25 years. People get bored and they want to do other things. People fucking die. Artists get sick. They break their hands. They decide that they want to go move to Tibet and raise llamas in the hills. So, they switch them out. And I guess they started a bit of a love affair because they ended up working on Hellblazer, Preacher, and then The Punisher. So Steve Dillon's artwork, as I was talking about, is kind of it's fucking awesome in his earlier runs, and then you can see as his kind of health declines, his line work gets a little bit more stiff, and his character faces start getting very similar. To the point where after Preacher ended, he worked on, I think it was Punisher Max. It was a Punisher title, and it was him and Ennis together. And it's a meme now that they had Frank face. So there's a much shared meme from, probably like the late 2000s, where every time you see Frank Castle, it's the exact same face, but like also his face is superimposed on everything else in the scene. And sometimes you flip them back and forth from like the original to the copy and you can't quite tell. But Steve Dillon's artwork it was great, especially in the early runs of Preacher, and it doesn't fall apart completely by the end of Preacher. And it's one of those things that you really can't describe it without telling people, but it's just accurate enough, close to on model for real human beings. People's arms are right. They bend right. They have their organs in the correct places. Their eyes and stuff move normally. It's a good mix of realistic line work and drawing like that, and then also kind of just an animated, kind of cartoony feel right on top of it, like a very thin, subtle layer, so that when the absurdity comes, it's not too absurd. And it really pays off, especially when, you've got angels fucking demons in the sky and fucking old cowboys walking through atomic fire, driving cross country for a few miles, hitchhiking with Elvis, well, maybe Elvis. And it's just a blast to see it all kind of come out. And it's not all like fun and games too. The comic goes to some very dark places, as I said before, things like racism, violence, blood grudges, things like that kind of come up fairly frequently. Everybody in the story is either the victim of or a constant perpetrator of violence, if not both things. The main bad guy in it, whose name is Herr Strauss, I think, he is just a psychopath, who constantly gets wounded throughout the entirety of the book, losing eyes, limbs, having his head wounded, and never really learning his lesson. And there's a lot of commentary on the nature of faith and religion, and the importance that it plays kind of in the American spirit. You know, there's never a point, and this is the entirety of the thing is kind of a takedown on the nature of God. God is missing through most of the book, and when he finally shows up again, far later in it, he sucks. He's a fucking dick. He's basically the sociopathic asshole you would think would have to exist to intentionally create every little good and bad thing on Earth. And very self-absorbed. So he's the kind of person that would do all of that and then also make a Bible and then also require that people love him. So, you know, but there's never really a takedown on religious people themselves. That is to say, people that kind of like have faith. It's never like, you know, oh, well, you know, you believe in God, you're flatly fucking idiotic or you're dumb as shit. There is plenty of people trying to justify themselves and their ill conduct by, you know, claiming that they're part of whatever religion and, you know, this is kind of what happens, you know, that's how God is worshipped kind of deal. And then, you know, you get your just comeuppance. But in general, it's not, you know, faith itself as a construct isn't really dragged through the mud. And it's kind of a testament to how good of a writing job they did that didn't happen, because I couldn't imagine there's a lot of, you know, heavy-handed writers, especially these days in the latter days of the Empire, that just love low-hanging fruit. And actually, really, it's probably not a big change since I was a kid. I'm just older now, so I notice it more. And, you know, people are just very, very eager to moralize and proselytize and stand up on their little pedestals and say this is good and that is bad. And then when you see the thing that's bad in their work, it'll be getting dragged or it'll be humiliating itself. And then when it's the good thing is always doing great, even if it's not necessarily something you think is good, if the writer does, which I hope I stay away from. Let me know if I don't in the comments below. But in this book, there's a lot of times where they could have gotten heavy-handed and preachy. I mean, it is preacher, but they really don't. You know, there's a bunch of fun monologues. There's a lot of times where people take really strong stances on stuff, and then like 20 minutes later, they're coming to kind of terms with their own fucking what you'd say, their own hypocrisies. And start to finish, there is a feeling deep down that Garth Ennis like believes in America, which I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I hope it is, because he did a very good job of it. But it's a great, honest to God love letter to somebody you have a complicated relationship with, where you don't let them off the hook. America is very well realized in this book, and I think that's why I like it to this day, is because it still feels very visceral and very real and very accurate to the times and just to the nature of this country, which I am from, by the way. I don't know if I know I have some Canadian listeners and some Brits are around too, but I am an American. I'm American as shit. I'm from the fucking Midwest, dude. But I do like it. I like that he wrote this in such a good way that you can read it and you don't feel like it's kissing your ass and you don't feel like it's letting you off the hook. And it's just a blast, man. I really can't recommend it enough. So yeah, go out and go ahead and read Preacher, Preacher. I got into a bad habit of spelling out stuff because it's required in all of my advertisements now. Like they want you to read stuff, and then there's always, if you've never seen a podcast advertisement thing before, it's like 3 pages, and there's like a page of like do say, there's a page of don't say, and there's a page of must say. So like on the do say thing, it's like pick 6 things and of these like 12 thing. Like this product tastes like butter, but doesn't taste like metal. It will fill up your stomach, but it won't rip out through your chest and hold your beating heart in front of you so you can watch it slowly stop pumping until you die. It doesn't. That's kind of the basic premise of it. But then at the bottom, there's always a you must say, and it's usually the link in the URL, and it always has you spell it out, which is it's a test, man, because I do them reading off the paper, right? But even then, it's hard to spell things that are really long in a row because it feels it's very much the same as trying to play sheet music and you're not very practiced, and you go from like ad-libbing to and then and you know that if anybody hears you misspell it, they're going to make fun of you, and then also you're going to have to do a make good read, which is basically a free commercial on the next program. But like, I don't know, I was reading something random off of my Westside Fairytales novelettes, WSFNOVELLETTES. I got that one. But HelloFresh, Westside, HelloFresh.com/Westside80. You gotta be hitting every stone on that bit of hopscotch. But sorry. Preacher, man, guys, go check it out. I'm gonna leave a link to it in the show notes. Okay, so in the group we have a weird dreams and nightmares thread, and this is just a way to give a shout out to people. Anybody who's got one that just kind of like speaks to me, or I think it's fucking hilarious, I'll read it out. This month's goes to Allison Calloway, who had a dream that at the end of the last Star Wars movie, Han Solo was tried for his various crimes before his service to the rebellion and executed by being tied to the back of a horse and dragged to death, while all of modern wizarding society watched and cheered. Which is just a blast, man. I dig it. If you guys want to try to submit some stuff, we got random things that go into the Horror and Lit Club, and I'll give you a shout out. I'll read it out, and that's just a good way for us to interact. If you have any comments, we're gonna have like comments threads and stuff. And if you have any interesting takes on books, if you want to talk about the things that I talked about in the day's episode, just hit me up and let me know. And you might find yourself up here. You'll be famous. In addition to everything else, I am really sorry that the first episode of this did not come out on time. I decided, although it might not seem like it, I decided to try to make the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club more legit than it was on the Patreon. On the Patreon, it's literally I just start talking, and then I stop, and then I put it online, which you probably got a feel for here. But on this one, I'm going to do a small amount of editing. And also, I spent about an hour and a half today making the theme song that you heard at the intro and the outro. I wrote that using GarageBand, and I hope you enjoy it. If you love the Westside Fairytales, hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. We're Westside Fairytales everywhere you can find us. On Twitter, we are at WS Fairytales. If you want to send me a line directly and just tell me I'm the fucking coolest dude on earth and you love that I live or that you hate me, you can send me a direct line on Gmail or by email at gmail.com. WestsideFairytales@gmail.com. Go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, hit us up in the Westside Fairytales Horror and Lit Club. If you want to throw us some money and get early access to episodes like this, and the main feed episodes, then go to patreon.com/Westside Fairytales. And for just $1 or more, you get access to episodes early. For $5, you get your name on the website. You get access to behind the story audio, which is very much like this, except for it's me going into detail about the month's story. And then for $10 or more, you get super early access to episodes, the raw versions of the episodes, which are without my intro or outro or any music. It's basically just the finished audiobook version of the story. And you also get some merch, and then like $20 and more, you get PDFs of the stories, including the artwork and even signed copies of individual stories if you hop up to the $50 tier. So pop on over to patreon.com/Westside Fairytales and start supporting indie horror today. The next thing that's going to come up on the feed is Westside Fairytales episode 309. Like, Jesus. That'd be Toda Americana Part 4. I know a lot of you have been waiting with bated breath for the end of the series. And I'm sorry that it couldn't come sooner. But unfortunately, for those of you who hate long form stories, everybody except for you seems to like them. So we're probably going to be doing more of them. I mean, I was going to do more of them anyway. But don't think it's a slight to you, and don't think it's me trying to be lazy. It literally just takes me so much time to write these things and put them out that I cannot work faster without sacrificing quality. I mean, I can barely get this podcast out. That's me just talking on time. Because I'm a loser. Oh, there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, yeah. For all you big fans of the show, especially you Patreon folks in the $10 up and higher tier, we are going to be having shirts very soon. So we're going to be opening an official merch store as soon as my dude, shout out Sam Swenson, wherever you are, as soon as he gets the merch store up and we get some designs finalized and settled, it should be in the next month or so, hopefully, according to what he's told me. You're gonna be able to walk around in your very own Westside Fairytales merch, and I know that's gonna be more of a benefit to me because I'll be making money off of it and stuff. But really, I can't thank you guys enough. My heart literally beats for my fucking fans. None of this would have been possible without you guys. Newcomers, old souls, everybody that's come out, even just to check out me talking into a microphone for 48 minutes about 2 books and almost everything else but those. Thanks. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your continued interest in the Westside Fairytales. And until next time, as always, stay safe out there.